Hey guys, tonight we journey to a place where the sand is fine. The Nile flows slow and steady like a lullaby, and the bread, well, the bread could probably take a few layers off your teeth. We're heading back thousands of years to the bustling world of ancient Egypt, not for pyramids, not for mummies, but to unravel the crumbly, gritty, and oddly eggy story of how the ancients tried to keep their teeth clean. You're in sandals. You're walking past clay houses, chickens, and a lot of sun-drenched linen. Someone just offered you beer for breakfast. You politely decline. There's a grainy taste in the air, literally. The wind carries fine dust from the desert, and every breath feels like it's exfoliating your molars. This is a land where your teeth will almost certainly betray you by the time you're 40. If you make it to 40, and yes, people did brush their teeth here, but the methods, let's just say, you probably won't survive this dental routine. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And I'd love to know where in the world you're watching from and what time it is there. It's oddly calming to imagine this sleepy little history club drifting off together, one time zone at a time. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wake to the chirping of ibis and the low slap of oars. It's morning in a riverside village somewhere near Thebes. You stretch, rise from your mat, and immediately feel it, that dull ache behind your front teeth. Like someone's wedged a splinter of stone into your gums. It's not dramatic, not yet, but it's there, throbbing faintly, and you already know the culprit. Breakfast awaits, a thick chunk of barley bread, dark and hard, made from flour ground between two sandstone slabs. If the flour has a bit of grit in it, well, that's normal. Everyone chews stone now and then. It builds character. And cavities. You take a bite. The crust breaks like ceramic. A few moments later, you're chewing with exaggerated care, your jaw moving slower than usual. Your neighbor, a reed cutter, gives you a knowing look and mutters something about wheat mouth. It's not a compliment. And yes, people knew about bad breath. Ancient Egyptians were famously obsessed with cleanliness. They shaved their heads to avoid lice, bathed twice daily if they could, and had hygiene routines that would put your gym friend with a 5-step skincare ritual to shame. Mouth odor, a no-go. You hear a woman nearby comment under her breath that someone smells like fish left too long in the net. It wasn't a metaphor. They meant it. Historians still argue whether toothbrushing was a widespread daily ritual or more of a priestly or elite habit. But what we do know is that teeth were a serious issue, worn down, cracked, infected, and frequently the cause of slow, quiet suffering. And so, your day begins. You rub at your sore gum with a finger dipped in natron, the naturally occurring salt used for mummification, laundry, and of course, oral hygiene. It stings. It works. Kind of. Not really. By mid-morning, you see a small cluster of villagers gathered near the market square. A traveling healer has come in with bundles of herbs, a few jars of honey, and something that looks suspiciously like a chicken bone, but might be a wand. She sells tiny packets wrapped in linen, tooth powders. She calls them guaranteed to clean and charm the mouth. You buy one and it smells like mint and firewood. You're told to mix it with water and dab it on with a stick. Or, if you're brave, chew it straight. You chew it straight, it tastes like regret. Still, something in you believes this is worth it. Even the gods seem to think oral health matters. There's an old temple carving of Thoth, the scribe god, with what looks suspiciously like a tiny toothpick tucked behind one ear. Coincidence? Possibly, but in a land where crocodiles were worshipped and onions were sacred, a divine toothpick is hardly the strangest thing. Nearby, two children are giggling as they dare each other to smell a fellow villager's morning breath. The loser pretends to faint. It's a whole thing. But you, now armed with your herbal grit paste and some salt, wander back toward your home. You'll chew another piece of barley. You'll drink some watered beer. You'll rinse once more with Nile water and call it purified. Because what choice do you have? In truth, your teeth are doomed. The bread, the sand, the constant chewing. It all takes its toll, and yet there's something oddly reassuring about this daily ritual. It connects you with the whole of your world. The river, the fields, the sun, and even the gods, who probably had their own breath issues now and then. You sit outside your home in the late sun, watching the light shimmer on the Nile. Someone nearby sings softly as they grind grain, probably adding another microscopic layer of sand to tomorrow's meal. You hum along, you smile carefully, and though your teeth might be under siege, at least you're not dealing with crocodile dung toothpaste yet. But give it time. You shuffle barefoot toward the palace district, past rows of whitewashed walls and palm-fringed gardens. The air is thick with that mix of baked clay, river reeds, and something slightly more pungent, incense and possibly decay. Word has it, there's a tooth specialist seeing patients in the royal compound today, and curiosity has gotten the better of you. Or maybe it's the dull pain near your back molars that's now humming like an angry wasp. You reach the palace's outer court, where even the guards are lounging in the shade. They give you a look, half amusement, half sympathy. They've seen this before. Everyone eventually finds themselves at the mercy of their teeth. You're ushered inside, not as a noble, of course, but as an observer, a helper to the temple scribes. That's how you've managed to get this close. The walls are painted with scenes of lotus flowers and sun gods, but inside the little clinic area, the smell isn't quite so divine. It's coppery, herbal, a little burnt. You try not to breathe too deeply. A woman, noble by her linen and gold earrings, reclines on a carved wooden couch. She winces as the dentist, a priest-physician, with an impressive beard and slightly trembling hands, leans over her with what appears to be a bronze hook and a small pot of honey. You squint. He dips the hook into the honey, then into what looks like powdered myrrh. With care, he begins dabbing it onto her bleeding gum line. You assume this must be step 1. You are mistaken. That's it. That's the whole treatment. To be fair, honey is antibacterial, and myrrh helps reduce inflammation. Modern science even backs some of this up, but it's a bit like fighting a house fire with a scented candle. Another patient, a palace attendant, steps forward next. His mouth smells like something died and didn't file a complaint. He opens wide, and the priest mutters something under his breath. Likely a prayer, possibly a curse. You notice he's got a thin strip of linen soaked in garlic oil. This he applies to the man's sore tooth, then ties it off like a little toothy headband. The man grimaces but doesn't scream. That's considered a win. Historians still argue whether these priest-physicians understood the inner workings of teeth, or were simply following religious prescriptions. Some suggest they might have seen infections and abscesses, and even attempted rudimentary extractions. Others argue that most dental treatments were more ceremonial than surgical, and indeed, you notice the physician murmuring invocations to Sekhmet, the lion-headed goddess of plagues and healing. He holds a small statuette of her in one hand, while applying a mixture of ground turmeric and beer foam to the patient's lower jaw. Was it ritual? Medicine? Both. You're handed a scroll to read aloud part of a healing charm. It goes something like, "Oh, you, pain in the bone, flee to the marshes and be no more." The rhyme is loose, but you commit to the bit. The patient's eyes flutter as he hears the chant. Maybe it's the words, maybe it's the beer. A bit later, you peek inside a smaller chamber where a scribe is making notes on each patient. He dips his reed pen into black ink and writes something next to one noble woman's name. You read over his shoulder, "Tooth gone. Will return with softened barley." The dreaded post-op diet. Ancient Egyptians often relied on mashed legumes, figs, and stews after losing a tooth. Whether through decay or some well-meaning priest with a bronze chisel, still. The real shocker today is the man in the corner who actually has a wooden prosthetic in his mouth, 2 teeth, carved to size, held together with gold thread. You're told this was inserted post-mortem, possibly to make the deceased appear whole before the gods. But rumors say some people had them while alive. Imagine biting into a date and leaving splinters as the sun shifts. A final patient arrives, an elderly woman with half her teeth missing and a grin that could curdle milk. She sits calmly, lets the priest poke and prod, and then, to everyone's surprise, pulls out her own remedy, a paste of cumin, crushed garlic, and goose fat. "My grandmother's recipe," she rasps. You're told she's never had a single infected tooth. Everyone stares at her like she's either blessed or slightly cursed. The session winds down. The noblewoman is handed a cloth of mint and juniper to chew for scent. The attendant with the garlic headband bows low and hurries out. You linger a moment, wondering how much of what you saw was healing and how much was hopeful guessing. On your way out, a priest stops you and presses a tiny amulet into your palm shaped like a molar. For protection, he says, you nod solemnly, though it feels less like a cure and more like a warning. The Nile breeze greets you outside. The sunlight feels a little softer now. You think about how much pain the ancients must have endured with a straight face and a sprig of mint between their teeth. And maybe, just maybe, you begin to understand why even pharaohs were afraid of their molars. You return to your village before sunset, sandals caked with dust and your mind buzzing with images of honey, herbs, and ominously long bronze hooks. But just as you're about to call it a day, you're waved over by a miller, one of the flour grinders responsible for keeping your neighborhood fed, and, unintentionally, everyone's enamel steadily eroded. His hut smells of ground grain and old sweat. In the corner, a rotary quern. A hand mill sits like some ancient torture device, its circular stones streaked with barley dust and little flecks of something darker. Probably not chocolate. The miller is cheerful, too cheerful, for someone who's single-handedly destroyed more teeth than time itself. He invites you in to watch. Bread is life, he says, but you pay for it in the mouth. As he grinds, you hear the unmistakable scrape of stone against stone. He adds barley between the slabs, turns the top stone in slow, rhythmic circles, and out comes flour and a faint, telltale crunch. You dip your fingers in and rub it between them. Gritty, like beach sand with dreams of becoming soup. This is the secret culprit behind most Egyptian dental misery. Not sugar, not candy, but sand. The sandstone querns used for milling were soft, so every turn shaved off tiny mineral bits, which made it into the flour, then into the bread, then into your molars. Think of it as ancient exfoliation for your teeth. You sample a fresh loaf. It's dense, chewy, and satisfying, until you feel a gritty bit slide between your molars like a tiny blade. You politely pretend not to notice. The miller winks. Historians still argue whether the Egyptian milling process was deliberately rough to preserve certain nutrients, or if it was simply the best tech available. There's some evidence that elite households used finer grindstones or sieved their flour, but most folks just ate the crunch and carried on. You chat with the miller about toothaches, and he chuckles. It's the bread that feeds you and bites you back, he says, patting his own cheek. He then shows you his personal remedy, a paste made from sycamore sap and fig pulp, which he dabs onto sore gums. It smells vaguely like fruit gone rogue, but he swears it works. You leave the miller's hut chewing thoughtfully, literally and figuratively. The texture of the bread lingers. So does the dull ache. You pass a group of children gnawing on dry crusts like goats. None of them seem bothered. Their teeth are still young, still blissfully unaware. Back home, you find your neighbor boiling something in a ceramic pot. It smells like onions and regret. You ask what it is, and she says, soft bread for old teeth. She lifts the lid to reveal a barley mash, bubbling and slightly brown. It looks like porridge that lost a fight. It's what my grandfather ate after he lost half his teeth, she explains. Gums can chew if you teach them patience. She offers you a bowl. You accept. It's warm, salty, and incredibly safe. No sand, no crunch. Your molars sigh in relief. You sit in the doorway together, watching the last light bend across the water. Someone's playing a stringed instrument in the distance. A baby is laughing, probably at absolutely nothing. And for a moment, all is calm. Then someone nearby bites into a loaf and yelps. You glance over and see a man spitting into the dirt, his hand over his mouth. Another casualty of the bread wars. You don't even flinch. It's part of life here. You think of the stone mills, the quiet erosion, the way a simple meal can wear a body down over decades. It's funny. We think of ancient empires as all gold and glory, but sometimes they're just a slow, sandy breakfast and a prayer. Your molar doesn't crack before midweek. The stars begin to appear, dim but steady. You yawn, rub your sore jaw again, and feel the fine grit still stuck near your gum line. The bread may have been sacred, but your dentist would have called it a felony. Still, as the wind cools and the quiet of the night returns, you find a strange comfort in it all. The grain, the grind, the grin and bear it attitude of a people who manage to build monuments while munching on sandstone. You curl onto your mat, belly full, mouth sore, and heart oddly peaceful. Tomorrow, you'll try the eggshell trick. Maybe. The sun hasn't quite risen yet, but the village is already stirring. Roosters are being unhelpfully enthusiastic, and someone nearby is clattering pots. Like it's their personal mission to defeat sleep. You sit up, stretch, and run your tongue along your teeth, still gritty, still sore, still defiantly holding on. But today, you're trying something different. You're headed to the local healer's hut, an elderly woman known for her peculiar pastes and opinions about moon cycles. She once claimed she could predict toothaches based on goat behavior, and while that sounds suspiciously unscientific, you've seen her do some surprisingly effective things with basil and a small copper spoon. You duck into her dim hut, which smells like burning rosemary, and the vague ghost of something pickled. Dried herbs dangle from the ceiling like sleepy bats. She's stirring something thick and chalky in a small dish, and gestures for you to sit without a word. She doesn't ask where it hurts. She simply hands you a bowl. Inside, crushed eggshells, charred ox hooves, powdered natron, and a little mint, ground together with what looks like pestle rage. She adds a few drops of vinegar and stirs it into a paste. To cleanse and harden the tooth spirit, she mutters. You raise an eyebrow. She raises a spoon. The mixture smells oddly fresh, like a sour cleaning product. You take a small bit on your finger and dab it onto your gums. It tingles. Then it burns a little. Then it sort of settles. Not pleasant, but definitely not boring. The eggshells are the key, she explains, full of calcium, and when ground fine enough, they work like tiny scrubbers. Historians still argue whether this formula was based on real efficacy or ritual tradition, but versions of it show up in several ancient papyri. The Eber's Papyrus, in particular, mentions a mixture strikingly similar to what's now coating your molars. You chew a licorice root to chase the taste. She tells you to avoid bread for a day. You nod and immediately think about bread. She swats your arm with a frond of something sharp-smelling. While the mixture sets, she brings out a small linen pouch from a clay jar. Inside are the ingredients for another tooth powder: ash from burned frankincense, powdered goosebone, and dried mint leaves. She pinches some onto your tongue and watches for fresh breath. She says, "Also, to prevent evil thoughts." Sure. She shows you her collection of mixing stones, each smoothed over from decades of daily use. Some of them even have little notches, etched symbols to mark specific blends. You wonder briefly if she has one for heartbreak, or annoying neighbors, or heartbreak caused by annoying neighbors. A knock at the door. A fisherman steps in, wincing, pointing at his jaw. She gives him a glob of the same egg mixture and sends him off with a mumbled chant. 3 days, she says. If you still ache, chew onion with vinegar and curse the moon. Practical advice, if you're into that sort of thing. Before you leave, she presses a tiny linen scroll into your hand to recite while brushing. She says, "It's a rhyme, not particularly elegant, but memorable. Shell of bird and bone of cow, clean this mouth. I ask thee now, if pain remains, then let it flee. Back to sand and not to me." Poetic dental hygiene. You can't help but smile. Back in the daylight, you head toward the river to rinse. You find a shallow spot where the water moves slow and clear. You cup some in your hands and swish, careful not to swallow. River water might cleanse the soul, but it definitely harbors some uninvited microbial guests. You spit, stare at the ripples, and notice something remarkable. Your teeth actually feel better. Not perfect, but a little smoother, a little less rebellious. You wonder how much of it is the eggshells, and how much is just the placebo effect with a good PR team. Nearby, a man brushes his teeth with a twig. Another spits out a mix of ashes and palm oil. You're not alone in this effort. The whole village, in their own way, is trying to outrun the inevitable decline of their dental reality. You dry your face, stand, and feel the day warming around you. There's something satisfying about the way ancient Egyptians turned everything into ritual. Even brushing your teeth could be a kind of sacred act, a daily mini-exorcism for your molars. You return to your home with a fresher mouth and a new appreciation for birds and their calcium-rich gifts. You may never look at an eggshell the same way again. The next morning, you're still savoring the mild miracle of less throbbing gums when your neighbor waves you over. He's holding what looks like a branch from a small, scraggly tree, dry, slightly bent, and stripped of bark at one end. "Chew stick," he says, from the persea tree, keeps the mouth from turning foul. You take it skeptically, turning it over in your hand. The stripped end has been frayed into something like a tiny broom. It smells faintly minty, maybe licorice, maybe something stronger. You nibble. It's bitter at first, then surprisingly fresh, like chewing on herbal mouthwash that also wants to be a salad. Use it every day. Your neighbor insists. Better than eggshells. Doesn't taste like breakfast. A fair point. Chewing sticks, or miswaks, are believed to be among the oldest forms of toothbrushes. Egyptians weren't alone in using them. Similar practices appear in early Islamic cultures across parts of India and sub-Saharan Africa, but they were probably among the first to ritualize it. You watch as a small boy mimics his father, carefully gnawing the end of a twig and brushing his baby teeth with all the solemnity of a priest performing a rite. Historians still argue whether the sticks were used more for cleaning or as breath fresheners, but either way, they seem to have been common. Some versions were dipped in salt, some in vinegar, others in crushed herbs. The idea was to fray the end into bristles, then scrub and scrape, gently enough not to damage the gum, but firmly enough to dislodge any lingering yesterday. You try it. The twig makes a soft scraping sound as you move it along your molars. It's oddly satisfying, like flossing with nature. Your jaw relaxes into a slow rhythm. The bitterness fades, replaced by something fresh, earthy. You think you taste a hint of fennel, or maybe hope. A woman passes by and nods approvingly. Your mouth is less angry today, she says. You thank her. Sort of. Nearby, two men are comparing chew sticks like merchants trading spice. One swears by date, palm twig soaked in fig juice. The other prefers something called the sky brush, which smells suspiciously like garlic. Keeps people away, he laughs, and spirits. A small girl joins the conversation with a stick wrapped in linen. She unwraps it proudly, revealing one end dipped in red ochre. From my auntie, she says, makes my breath smell like roses. You're skeptical. You're also wrong. It actually smells amazing. You tuck your own stick into your belt, feeling oddly upgraded. Later that day, you sit in a shaded courtyard, watching a scribe slowly draw diagrams of the human head. Not anatomically accurate, but he's trying. He points at a crude molar and says, "The root goes deep, like a curse." You nod wisely, mostly because your mouth is full of date cake. And now isn't the time to argue dental metaphors. A passing merchant overhears the conversation and offers you a small packet of crushed juniper berries mixed with oil. For the chew stick, he says, makes the mouth blessed. You accept. It smells like a forest having a thoughtful day. You remember the healer's rhyme from yesterday and whisper it to yourself while brushing. It makes the motion feel intentional, like you're part of something older than soap, older than shampoo, a ritual of resistance against the creeping entropy of decay. Evening falls. People gather near the river, rinsing their mouths after dinner. Some chew fennel seeds, others swish warm beer and spit theatrically. There's a certain solidarity in it. This nightly battle for freshness, fought with twigs and herbs and whatever you can find in the garden. A boy boasts about using a crocodile tooth pendant to scare away gum demons. His sister laughs and tells him his breath still smells like yesterday's onions. He shrugs, chews harder. You return to your mat, chew stick in hand, and give your teeth one last lazy brush before bed. The twig's fibers are soft now, curling at the ends, like little whiskers of effort. You spit once, rinse with a few drops of scented water, and let your jaw rest. You think back to this morning's ache and realize it's gone, or at least it's napping. Maybe, just maybe, the persea tree is onto something. You drift to sleep with the faint taste of fennel on your tongue and the quiet conviction that nature, not just ritual, is keeping your smile intact. For now, the air is already warming by mid-morning when you're summoned to the temple precinct, not for worship this time, but for a more mundane curiosity. Word has spread that one of the temple scribes is displaying his personal medical kit today. And in Egypt, where a scribe might double as a healer or even a part-time embalmer, that can mean anything from scalpels to charms to interesting ointments. You arrive to find a small wooden table laid out with care. There are rows of slender copper tools, neatly rolled linen strips, jars of powdered herbs, and a bowl containing what looks like solidified wax. The scribe, beaming with a kind of quiet showmanship, gestures for everyone to step closer. This, he says, tapping a flat-bladed copper probe, is for inspecting gums and sometimes for removing uninvited pieces of yesterday's meal. He holds it like a prized pen. You nod, trying not to imagine that thing scraping your own teeth. To your surprise, he then pulls out a small flint blade, still the best for precision, he adds, though it's best not to sneeze while using it. A joke. Probably, you hope. Copper and flint were the go-to dental tools of the day, not because they were ideal, but because they were available. Copper is soft enough to shape yet strong enough to prod, while flint, when chipped correctly, can produce edges sharper than modern scalpels. Historians still argue whether these tools were truly used for regular dental maintenance, or more often for post-mortem cosmetic repairs. But archaeological evidence shows worn teeth with deliberate scraping marks and even signs of attempted fillings. You lean closer to the wax bowl. The scribe says, for temporary relief, warmed, mixed with herbs, and pressed into the hollow of a painful tooth, doesn't last. But it pleases the gods of minor annoyances, he chuckles, though you're pretty sure he's being serious. Another item on display catches your eye. A reed-thin metal needle with a twisted top. You raise an eyebrow. The scribe explains, for draining things, mostly not recommended before lunch. The crowd laughs uncomfortably. He points next to a small wooden mouth prop, wedge-shaped and stained with age, for keeping the mouth open during a ceremony or other procedure. You don't ask what other means. You'd rather not know. Nearby, an apprentice lays out samples of various herbal tooth powders. One smells strongly of clove and anise. Another reeks of sulfur and donkey milk. That one's experimental. He offers helpfully, still working on the balance. One old man in the crowd steps forward with a gold wire in hand. He claims his uncle used it to tie two broken teeth together after a cart accident. Whether it's true or not, the scribe seems impressed. He notes that gold was sometimes used for braces, not the kind to straighten teeth, but to hold them in place after trauma. Some mummies have been found with these ancient dental bridges, suggesting not just care, but a deep respect for facial presentation. Even in the afterlife, at this, the scribe holds up a tiny scroll, covered in neat hieratic script. "This," he says, "is a guide from my teacher. It contains instructions for preparing a tooth salve of great sweetness and strength." He reads aloud part of the recipe. Boil figs until soft. Crush with wild mint and powdered crocodile jawbone. Mix with honey. Apply under the moonlight. The crocodile bit gets a murmur from the crowd. You're starting to notice a pattern. The line between medicine and magic is thin, very thin, possibly non-existent, and still, it all feels oddly thorough. They didn't just poke and pray. There was thought here, an earnest attempt at relief, a trial-and-error system based on observation, experience, and a little help from divine intervention. As the scribe finishes his presentation, he opens one last jar. For cleansing the tools, he explains, inside, a mixture of beer, and vinegar, and burned palm bark, sharp, sour, sterilizing in its own rudimentary way. He invites you to try one of the scraping tools on a cow skull. You oblige, gently dragging the curved blade along the teeth. It's surprisingly smooth. The sound it makes is less appealing, like a cat sharpening its claws on your dreams. The session ends with a prayer, not to any one god in particular, but to the comforter of bones and gums. The crowd disperses slowly, chatting, sharing stories, and you realize how normal this is here. Not the tools, not the pain, but the attention to it, the effort, even in an age where death was common and medicine still whispered its way out of superstition. Toothaches were taken seriously. You walk home with a mental image of copper hooks and honey salve molars dancing behind your eyelids. And though you're grateful for modern floss, you can't help but respect the strange elegance of those ancient tools, imperfect, sometimes brutal, but made with care. Back in your doorway, the neighbor's goat chews on a sandal. You chew your mint twig in solidarity? By now, you're starting to realize that oral care in ancient Egypt wasn't just about grinding twigs or dabbing on oddly fragrant pastes. It was an entire experience, a lifestyle. Even, and like most things in this civilization, it had its ceremonial side too. So when someone invites you to a mid-tier noble's garden banquet with mouth purification, you say yes before they finish the sentence. The sun dips low as you arrive. The garden is lush, lined with date palms and lotus blossoms. Tables are laid out under linen canopies, and servants scurry about with trays of lentil cakes, pickled fish, and curiously small bowls of cloudy liquid. You're handed one almost immediately. The host, smiling with the practiced grace of someone who owns more wine than common sense, clinks his bowl with yours. Rinse, he says, spit. Then chew something fragrant and pretend you're divine. You peer into the bowl. It smells oddly pleasant, like watered-down myrrh with a touch of coriander. You swish it around your mouth. It burns a little, but not in a mean way, more like a polite reminder that it's working. You lean discreetly over a ceramic spittoon and let it go. The person next to you does the same and offers you a fennel seed as a post-rinse mint. Welcome to ancient Egyptian mouthwash. The host proudly announces that this rinse was made according to a temple-approved recipe: steeped myrrh resin, a touch of natron, wine vinegar, and crushed sycamore bark. Some even added carob or cinnamon, if they could afford the luxury. The goal wasn't just fresh breath, but purification, to smell clean, to be clean, especially before important rituals or public events. Historians still argue whether these mixtures were everyday use or more ceremonial. Some believe rinsing was mostly practiced by priests and higher officials who had strict purity codes. Others think versions of these formulas made their way into homes, diluted and passed along with less fanfare, and probably fewer expensive spices. After the rinse, the host produces a collection of chews. These are fragrant resins, frankincense, mastic gum, even tiny pellets of dried honey and cinnamon. People pop them like ancient breath mints, smiling knowingly at one another with now scented grins. You try a piece of mastic. It's chewy, slightly bitter at first, then sweet. It sticks to your molars a bit, but your mouth feels fresher, cleaner, more civilized. A priest in training sitting nearby shares that chewing certain resins was believed to calm the bile of the mouth. He quotes a line from an old papyrus: "To chew is to quiet the demon of rot." A bit dramatic. But then again, have you ever smelled ancient fish breath? As the evening goes on, you notice the rhythm of the banquet. Eat, rinse, chew, laugh, repeat. Conversation flows easily. Laughter punctuates the air like tambourine bells. You can't help but think that there's something soothing about this layered ritual, like flossing with friends, but without the part where you bleed and lie about how often you do it. One older man boasts about a rinse made with wine and crushed lotus petals, only for seduction, he says with a wink. His wife rolls her eyes and adds, "He used too much vinegar once and couldn't taste for 2 days." They both laugh. The host himself swears by a morning rinse of milk, pounded mint, and barley ash. He claims it clears the tongue and the mind. You nod respectfully, while trying not to imagine what that smells like at 5 a.m. Just as dessert is served, sweet date balls rolled in honey. Someone starts singing a song about the girl with lotus-scented breath. It's catchy. You hum along. Apparently, oral freshness was not only hygienic, but romantic currency. You linger a while longer under the stars, belly full and mouth surprisingly minty. You realize that these people didn't just rinse for health. They rinsed to feel more presentable, more refreshed, more themselves. It wasn't about vanity. It was about harmony with others, with the gods, even with their own breath. As the gathering winds down, guests are offered one last bowl of rinse water and a sprig of sweet basil to chew on the walk home. You take both, half out of politeness, half because you're starting to enjoy this ancient spa day energy. Back in your courtyard, you sip water from a clay jug and swish a little extra, just because. Your teeth feel oddly serene. The faint sting of natron lingers in a friendly sort of way, and as you settle into your mat, staring up at the star-pricked sky, you think maybe good oral hygiene is less about the tools and more about the rhythm. Eat, rinse, breathe, smile, and choose something vaguely tree-like when in doubt. The next day brings you back to the far side of the village, near the granaries and goat pens, where a farmer turned healer named Beck, the kind of man who wears a necklace of beetle shells, unironically, has set up shop under a faded linen awning. He's known locally for treating toothaches with a method less science and more story. You arrive to find Beck seated cross-legged beside a low table covered in wooden idols, bits of chalky stone, and what appear to be bird feathers. He greets you without looking up, muttering. Another with worm mouth. I see. You blink. Worm mouth. Beck finally glances at you and nods gravely. Toothworms, he says. You can feel them. Yes, they dance when you chew and sleep when you rinse. He taps his temple. They like figs. Welcome to one of the more enduring medical theories in ancient dentistry, the toothworm. This idea, popular across many early cultures. Not just Egypt claimed that tiny worms lived inside your teeth, causing pain when they wriggled and rot when they stayed too long. The Greeks believed it, so did the Mesopotamians, and here in Egypt, people like Beck have built entire healing routines around it. Historians still argue whether Egyptian physicians truly believed in literal worms, or if it was a metaphor for decay. But enough textual fragments and artwork hint at actual procedures to coax the worm out, including smoking, oil infusions, and gentle chants whispered directly at the tooth. Beck picks up a small pot of something dark and resinous, cedar oil. He explains, worms hate it. Watch. He dips a thin reed into the oil and motions for you to open your mouth. You hesitate. He waits. You sigh and comply. He applies a few drops to the back molar that's been giving you trouble. The taste is sharp, earthy, and somehow ancient. Then he taps the tooth gently with a bronze pin. If the worm is angry, he says, it will show itself by tomorrow. You're not sure what that means, but Beck seems convinced. He presses a clay disc into your palm, carved with a snake coiled around a tooth. Put this under your head while you sleep. He advises, the worm will smell it and retreat as you walk away, tongue still tingling from the cedar oil. You wonder how much of this is myth and how much is just a very enthusiastic aromatherapy session. Still, you can't deny the sting made your tooth go a little numb. Placebo or pest control? Who's to say? Later in the day, you speak with a local midwife who's heard of the worm theory, but has her own interpretation. They aren't real worms. She says, they're the spirits of spoiled food. Trapped and angry, she offers you a different treatment. Chew a clove wrapped in cloth while walking counterclockwise around your house. 3 times. At sunset, you do it. Not because you're convinced, but because, well, what if it does work? You notice more of these charms and sayings the more you listen. People say the toothworm bites more during full moons, that it can be driven out by shouting the name of your childhood goat, that it curls up when you cry. One boy even swears he saw a worm come out once, but his sister quickly points out that he'd also hit his head that week. That night, lying on your mat with Beck's clay disc under your head, you feel a twinge in your tooth and think, what if they were right not about worms exactly, but about something alive in there, some invisible source of trouble that responds to oil, words, or even the occasional chant. In the quiet, you find it oddly comforting to imagine a tiny worm with a name and a motive. At least then, your toothache has a personality, something to reason with. You drift off half believing in Beck's little world, where oil can oust a demon, chance can soothe a nerve, and clay talismans keep your enamel safe through the night. And if it doesn't work, well, at least your mouth smells faintly of cedar. The days roll on with the comforting rhythm of chores, chewing, and cautious optimism about your molars. Your mouth still complains now and then, but thanks to herbs, eggshells, and perhaps a bit of worm whispering, it feels like the worst has passed. This morning, however, you're walking with someone far less interested in pain relief and far more focused on looking good doing it. Her name is Neferu, a noble woman with a fan made of ostrich feathers, a voice like honey stirred with sarcasm, and most notably impeccable teeth, or at least the illusion of them. She's invited you to watch her morning beauty routine, and let's just say, it does not involve rolling out of bed and hoping for the best. Inside her villa, the scent of lotus oil hangs in the air like a perfumed promise. Her cosmetic box, an actual chest, not a pouch, is laid out with all the precision of a military campaign. There are brushes carved from ivory, pots of red ochre, vials of scented resins, and a gold compact mirror polished to a dull shine. But Neferu doesn't start with her eyes or lips. She starts with her mouth. Presentation is everything, she says, dabbing her tongue with a cloth soaked in sweet wine and myrrh. No one wants to flirt with the breath of an ox cart. She holds up a small stick, chewed to bristles on one end. This is my morning wand, she announces, Persia wood, soaked overnight in mint and date syrup. You watch as she gently scrapes her teeth with it, humming to herself. When she finishes, she spits neatly into a bowl and moves on to the next step. Her lips. She mixes a bit of red ochre with animal fat to make a lip stain. The ochre gives a rusty, earthy tone striking against her skin, and the fat keeps it from drying out. Makes them look like ripe figs, she says, smirking. In a polite way. You raise an eyebrow. She shrugs. We all have our metaphors. She then pinches a bit of powdered frankincense between her fingers and dabs it onto her gums, prevents swelling, and also, it smells divine when you whisper secrets. Historians still argue whether such practices were strictly cosmetic or had health benefits, but across tombs and tablets, there's evidence of women and men enhancing their mouths with everything from perfumed rinses to colored salves. One scroll even advises, to impress the court, carry the scent of lilies on the tongue. You ask if she ever uses crocodile dung paste, and she laughs so hard, she almost drops her eyeliner. Only if I want to repel people. Instead, she shows you a tiny jar of what she calls her party paste, a mixture of honey, powdered cinnamon, and just a touch of citrus zest. Kisses better than wine, she quips. You try not to imagine her fan club. Midway through her routine, a servant arrives with a clay cup of chilled water infused with basil and lotus petals. Neferu rinses carefully, then bites gently into a fennel pod for good measure. You never know when conversation will turn intimate, she says, patting her lips. You can't help but admire the effort, not just for beauty, but for presence. In a society so tied to rituals of life, death, and everything in between, even the act of freshening your breath could feel sacred, or flirty, or both. A friend of Neferu's enters a young man with a painted coal line sharp enough to cut through social awkwardness. He greets her with an air kiss and promptly offers a new clove-based rinse he's just acquired from a traveling perfumer. It tingles. He warns, but in a good way. You try a drop. It does tingle. Like your mouth just inhaled a polite lightning bolt. Neferu adds it to her collection with the solemnity of a priest acquiring a new sacred text. Later, as she prepares to leave for a gathering at the garden pavilion, you ask how often she goes through this process. Every morning, she says, adjusting her necklace. If your mouth is your gateway to words, shouldn't it be dressed like a queen? You walk home reflecting on that. It's easy to think of oral care as merely functional scrape, rinse, survive. But for some, it was performance, a fragrant smile in a dusty world, a way to charm, communicate, and maybe distract from the occasional molar mutiny. As night falls and you prepare for sleep, you dab your gums with a hint of honey and basil, just for fun. You're not going anywhere, and no one's looking, but somehow it feels right. After all, even dreams deserve fresh breath. You wake in the deep blue hush before dawn, to a peculiar sound, someone groaning softly nearby. Not in mortal peril, just deeply uncomfortable. You shuffle over to investigate and find your elderly neighbor, Hapu, sitting on a stool outside his door, cradling his jaw like it's a fragile amphora. Gums, he mutters, swollen like Nile frogs in flood season. You wince in sympathy. He gestures you closer and shows the inside of his cheek. It's red, puffy, and visibly irritated. No bread today, he grumbles, unless it's been chewed by a donkey first. You offer him a dab of the basil and honey mix you've started to enjoy, but he waves it off. Not enough. This isn't breath trouble. It's curse trouble. You blink, And just like that, you're back on familiar terrain where gum disease meets divine misalignment. Hapu insists the swelling started right after his wife scolded him during the new moon. Said my laughter offended the spirit of quiet. He says, now my gums want revenge. So you accompany him to the local temple where a priestess known for her mouth magic takes patience before sunrise. She greets Hapu with practiced calm and invites him to sit beside an altar scented with burning herbs, thyme, juniper, and something slightly more alarming. She examines his mouth, mutters a few phrases in Old Middle Egyptian, then nods sagely. Your mouth's balance is off. Too much heat, possibly envy. She then begins preparing a remedy, a paste of onion juice, crushed coriander, and wait for it beer foam. Yes, beer foam. Apparently, it cools inflammation and pleases certain gods of fermentation. She applies the paste with a carved wooden spatula, instructing Hapu to keep his mouth still and think harmonious thoughts. He grimaces. She lights incense. You try not to sneeze. Then comes the incantation. It's slow and rhythmic. Gums of fire, cease your rage. By lotus root and thyme and sage, return to peace, release your bite. Let morning come without the fight. As she chants, she fans Hapu's face with a strip of linen and occasionally rings a small copper bell. The bell, she says, startles lurking spirits and clears blocked energies, sort of a metaphysical floss. Historians still argue whether such rituals were meant to heal or simply to soothe, but their presence in healing papyri suggests they weren't taken lightly. Egyptians believed health and harmony were deeply intertwined. A sore tooth wasn't just a problem, it was a message. When the chanting ends, the priestess gives Hapu a wax amulet shaped like a mouth to be worn around his neck until his breath is calm. He thanks her with the weary dignity of a man who's seen both battle and basil. You walk him home slowly. His jaw seems a little less tense, whether from the paste, the prayer, or sheer hope. He asks you to bring soft lentils later, then chuckles, maybe I was a little too smug after dinner. Spirits don't like gloaters. Back in the village square, you overhear two women discussing a cousin who cured her aching jaw by sleeping with a garlic clove tied to her wrist. The pain travels downward, one says, nodding confidently. Always follow gravity. Later, at the granary, a young man with a wrapped headband claims his gum pain comes from too much moonlight while arguing. He's chewing on clove and charcoal like it owes him money. Even in a culture known for its medical advancements, splints, surgical tools, and hundreds of documented treatments, there's always that line between the practical and the spiritual. The gum line, it seems, is where that line gets particularly blurry. Back at your place, you take a moment to examine your own mouth in a polished bronze shard. The gums look fine, no puffiness, but just to be safe, you chew a bit of mint, dab a little honey, and mumble a half-serious thanks to any spirit willing to listen. That night, Hapu sends over a gift dried figs and a note that reads, "My mouth forgives me. still can't chew, but it's less vengeful. You smile carefully. The next morning, the sky is already blushing with heat as you make your way down a quiet path, lined with date palms and sleepy goats. Today, you're visiting a friend, a young mother named Tia, whose baby has just begun teething. You'd heard her wailing 2 nights ago, echoing across the village like a very small, very angry god. Tia greets you at the threshold, hair slightly disheveled, eyes tired but smiling. She's finally sleeping, she whispers. But I think we've entered the chewing era. Inside, the baby lies swaddled, cheeks flushed, tiny fists twitching. Around her neck hangs a strip of linen bearing a single item, a small crocodile tooth. You raise an eyebrow. It wards off gum pain, Tia explains, and biting spirits. Of course, across ancient Egypt, teething was more than just a developmental phase. It was a battleground. Infants could suddenly develop fevers, crankiness, and what we now know to be mild inflammation and discomfort. But without understanding the biology, ancient families often turned to magic, or crocodiles, or both. The amulet is one of many. Some used carved hippo ivory, associated with the protective goddess Taweret. Others tied blue faience beads onto necklaces, or tucked small scarab charms under the baby's head. Each symbol carried a layer of protective intent: soothe the pain, keep the demons away, let the child sleep, and maybe, just maybe, let the mother sleep. 2. Tia shows you a paste. She's been trying a mash of figs and chamomile, applied gently to the baby's gums. My grandmother's recipe, she says. Sweet, soft, and makes her mouth too sticky to scream. You help her mix another batch. The fig pulp warm from the sun, the chamomile smelling faintly of calm evenings and riverbanks. The baby stirs but doesn't cry when it's applied. A small miracle. Tia also shares a trick she learned from a temple nursemaid. Dip a soft reed in cool water, then let the baby gnaw on it. It's like biting the river, she says with a shrug. You try not to picture a toddler with a waterlogged stick hanging out of their mouth, but it's oddly endearing. Historians still debate the medical efficacy of many of these remedies. Some argue that the charms were purely psychological comforts for parents. Others point out the antimicrobial properties in ingredients like fig and chamomile, which, even today, appear in natural teething gels. The symbolism may have carried more weight than the science, but it's hard to separate the two in a world where both were deeply interwoven. A neighbor stops by, holding a clay rattle shaped like a goose. This one's been blessed, she says, handing it over with pride. The rattle is filled with small pebbles and emits a soft, sandy whisper with every shake. Sometimes distraction works better than medicine. The baby grabs it with surprising force and gives it a determined shake. Everyone cheers softly. Later, while Tia rests, you sit beside the sleeping child, watching her twitchy eyelids and softly puffing cheeks. You think of all the small rituals packed into one little tooth, breaking through skin charms, pastes, reed sticks, whispered prayers. There's something deeply human about it all. Not the desperation, but the care, the belief that every ache has an answer, that even tiny mouths deserve attention, gentleness, and a good luck crocodile now and then. As you leave, Tia presses a tiny bag into your hand. For your future children, she says with a wink. Inside are sprigs of dried chamomile, a linen strip, and you guessed it, a tiny carved tooth. You walk home smiling, the bundle swinging softly at your side, already infused with stories. Later that night, you catch yourself chewing the end of a reed as you sit in the doorway, listening to distant lullabies. Maybe you're soothing your own teeth. Maybe you just like the taste. Either way, you're not the only one who needs a little help growing into your bite. You're sitting outside at dusk, the sky melting into gold and lavender, when old Merritt, the village baker's mother, shuffles by, carrying a clay pot covered with a linen cloth. She's mostly toothless, her mouth caved slightly inward, but she still hums with the confidence of someone who knows 50 ways to make lentils taste exciting. "Soupy," she says, lifting the pot just enough to let out a fragrant waft of garlic and crushed chickpeas. For people who used to chew, you invite her to sit and ask, with genuine curiosity, how she manages daily meals now that she's missing most of her teeth. She grins wide, the gaps bold and unapologetic. "I eat like a pharaoh in his final days." She jokes. "Everything is soft, warm, and tastes like patience." She ladles out a portion of her soup and hands you a carved wooden spoon. It's thick, creamy, full of mashed legumes and finely minced herbs. Not glamorous, but comforting in a way that sticks to your bones. Losing teeth isn't the end, she continues between sips. It just means your food gets friendlier. She explains that as people aged in ancient Egypt, and their teeth wore down from decades of gritty bread and chew sticks, the diet naturally shifted. Out went the hard crusts and crunchy dates. In came lentils, stewed vegetables, mashed figs, barley porridge, and soft goat cheese. Texture was no longer a culinary thrill. It was a hazard. Historians have noted that many older Egyptian skeletons show severe tooth wear, even total molar flattening. Some had abscesses, others had teeth ground down to the roots. Yet they lived on thanks, in large part, to soft, easy-to-swallow food that required more simmering than chewing. Merritt shows you her pantry, a shelf of dried pulses, jars of preserved fruits, a small sack of crushed flax. She tells you that mashed black beans mixed with cumin was her late husband's favorite meal when his back teeth gave out. He said it tasted like memory, she says, then chuckles. "I think he just didn't want to admit he couldn't bite an olive anymore." She also shares a clever little trick, soaking stale bread in wine and honey overnight. "You call it soggy," she says. "I call it dessert." Later, as she prepares a soft mash of cooked lentils, coriander, and roasted garlic, she adds a few drops of fig syrup. Sweetness tricks the brain. She winks, makes you forget the teeth are gone. As you help her stir, She hums an old kitchen song. You pick up the rhythm, tapping the spoon against the rim of the pot. The melody low and circular, like most lullabies, and then she tells you about the toothless tongue, a phrase used by the old women in the village. Not an insult, but a badge of wisdom. The idea was that when you stopped chewing so much, you started tasting more, each flavor more pronounced, when it wasn't competing with crunch. My taste is sharper now than ever, she says, even if my bite is a rumor. You ask if she misses anything like roasted locusts or salted almonds. She shrugs. I miss how loud my food used to be. But quiet food suits me now. After dinner, she gives you a small wrapped bundle. Inside, a date stuffed with crushed nuts that have been softened in honey. Let it sit in your mouth. She advises. It knows what to do. As you walk her home, you spot several other elders chatting by a fire, each cradling their own soft meals. A mash of stewed pears, a warm bowl of fermented milk, a slow rhythm of eating without haste. You realize that for all their dental challenges, they've turned their twilight diets into a kind of culinary wisdom, meals that ease rather than fight the aging body, gentle sustenance for worn teeth and wise stomachs. That night, you eat another bowl of myrrh soup alone, slowly, letting each spoonful rest on your tongue. No crunch, no risk, just warmth and spice and time. Your jaw relaxes, your gums approve, your dreams begin. The following day finds you near the edge of the necropolis, where the desert air shifts from sun-baked bustle to something quieter, cooler, more patient. You've been invited to observe a burial preparation not of a pharaoh or noble, but of a middle-class scribe who recently passed. Respected for his calm voice and beautiful handwriting, you're not here to discuss the grand rituals of embalming. You're here for the teeth. The tomb workers, dressed in simple white, handle the body gently, reverently. A priest marks small circles of protection around the limbs with natron powder. As the body is cleaned and anointed, you notice one of the embalmers pause just slightly at the mouth. He reaches for a slender bronze tool and carefully lifts the man's lip. You lean in and see that several of the teeth are missing. Others are cracked. The gums have receded like a shoreline during drought. It's the mouth of someone who lived long, who chewed many loaves, who likely knew the sting of hot barley soup on an aching molar, and yet there's something gleaming. Nestled along the left incisor is a thin strip of gold wire, wrapped carefully around what remains of a broken tooth. The embalmer nods. He lived with that for years, he says. His family brought him to the temple for it. Didn't want him to lose his smile. You're staring at one of the earliest known examples of dental prosthetics. Primitive, yes, but elegant in intent. A gold thread bridge, a solution built not for chewing, but for dignity. Historians still debate how functional these were. Some believe the wires were added post-mortem to preserve the body's symmetry, while others suggest they were used in life to stabilize loosened teeth. In either case, their presence suggests more than pain relief. It suggests pride. As the embalmers work, They brush a paste of natron and myrrh around the mouth, both to preserve and to purify. One even whispers a protective charm under his breath. May your words reach the gods unmarred by rot. There's a deep belief here that even in death, the mouth must be made whole, capable of speech, of breath, of final judgment. Later, you're shown another body in a side chamber, older, more deteriorated. But here, too, is evidence of dental intervention, a molar plugged with linen and resin, packed tightly, as if to stem infection. He complained of pain before he passed. The assistant explains, this helped him eat soup again. You think back to Merritt's lentil mash, to Hapu's swollen gums, to the resin-drenched fig paste, and suddenly, it's all one long arc. Life begins with teething and ends, sometimes, with a bit of linen and resin in the back of your mouth, a soft prayer on your lips, and maybe a piece of gold wire holding your smile in place. As the tomb is sealed, the priest adds one last offering, a chew stick, placed gently beside the wrapped hand. He always carried one. The priest said it made his thoughts cleaner. The sun slips lower as you walk away. The necropolis quiet behind you. You feel a strange mix of awe and calm. Not because of grand monuments or royal treasures, but because someone cared enough to preserve a molar. Later, back in the village, you run your tongue along your own teeth. They're still there, mostly, but now you know how far people will go to protect them, not just for comfort, but for dignity, for expression, for the whisper of an afterlife smile. That night, you dream of a golden tooth, gleaming in the torchlight, held carefully between linen-wrapped fingers. It does not speak, but you feel it saying something anyway. The stars are still out when you rise the next morning, and for once, your teeth feel fine. No dull ache behind your jaw, no twinge from last night's lentil stew, just that rare and lovely sense of oral peace. So naturally, you decide to poke at it. Today, you've been invited to join a group of temple apprentices brewing a new batch of tooth powder. Not for themselves, necessarily they're making it for sale. A kind of ancient marketing venture, divine freshness in a jar. You meet them behind the main hall, where a set of low clay ovens keep the morning chill at bay. A line of ingredients stretches across the preparation table, some familiar, others slightly unsettling. Crushed eggshell, ground pumice, dried mint leaves, some myrrh, burnt bread crust, goose bone, a splash of sour beer, and one rather ambiguous item labeled only desert chalk. The lead apprentice, a boy named Kennamun, who always smells faintly of rose water and overconfidence, grins at you. We're testing a new batch. Want to help? You nod. Cautiously, he begins by mixing the mint, myrrh, and chalk with a wooden pestle, humming as he works. The mint cools the breath. He says, the myrrh calms the gums. The chalk keeps things interesting. You raise a brow. He shrugs. It's traditional. Next comes the ground eggshell, surprisingly fine, almost like talc. We dry them under moonlight for 7 nights. Another apprentice explains. The gods approve more that way. Historians still argue whether this was true religious instruction or just someone's poetic flair that stuck. There are multiple recipes from the Abers and Hurst papyri that mention specific timings, often linked to celestial cycles. Some even insist the powder must be stirred with a fig wood spoon under a waxing moon, or it won't work. Is that science? Magic? Branding? Cinnamon adds a splash of beer flat, cloudy, slightly sour, for consistency, he says, and because we ran out of vinegar. The scent wafting from the bowl is complex, like a garden, a funeral offering, and a warm loaf of barley bread, all had a conversation in your mouth. They pass around small reed spoons for everyone to test the blend. You scoop up a pinch and place it gingerly on your tongue, then press it along your teeth with your finger. It's gritty, a little spicy, and tastes faintly of soot and spearmint. A girl named Anhai winces and adds more frankincense to the bowl. It needs something holy. She says. Cinnamon rolls his eyes but stirs it in. They spend the next hour debating tiny adjustments, whether powdered date seed adds sweetness or just makes you crave snacks, whether goose bone should be charred or raw, whether certain herbs offend certain gods. It's part recipe testing, part philosophical salon, with dental overtones. You ask if people really believe the moon affects the powder's strength. Anhai nods seriously. The moon sees inside us. It knows when the breath is true. She then admits the moon drying is also helpful for keeping out insects, but it's mostly about symbolism, she adds. Symbolism and good lighting. Finally, the batch is ready. They spoon the powder into little linen-wrapped bundles, each stamped with a reed seal, a stylized mouth and the word Sekhem power, oral power. To be precise, as you help carry the bundles to market, you notice how eagerly people approach. This isn't snake oil. It's trusted, generational. Your neighbor even insists her grandmother used the same formula during festival season. You overhear a buyer ask if the powder was mixed during a full moon. Of course. Cinnamon lies smoothly and stirred with a sycamore twig by a priest who hadn't spoken in 3 days. The woman is so impressed, she buys 3. You don't know whether to laugh or be impressed. That evening, you try the powder again, this time with a drop of oil and a bit of soft reed. The mixture scrapes and soothes in equal measure. You spit into a palm leaf and rinse with cool water. Your mouth feels balanced. You wonder if it's the mint or the myrrh, or maybe just the way the act itself feels steadying, intentional, as if you're telling the world, I care enough to rub burnt bread and moon-kissed chalk into my face. You lie back, smile slightly, and taste a faint trace of frankincense. Not unpleasant. Tonight, there will be no charms, no healing chants, no chewed twigs or clove oil, just the simple pleasure of a clean mouth, a full belly, and the sense that even in a land of gods and gold, someone still cared enough to invent toothpaste. The wind carries a cool hush as you wander alone along the Nile's edge, the final light of day smudging gold across the water. The reeds sway gently, their rustling a quiet kind of applause for the river's endless performance. You've come here to reflect, to walk, and perhaps to say a soft goodbye to this long, peculiar journey through ancient mouths. There's a fig in your hand, ripey, soft, sun-warmed. You bite into it slowly, feeling its sweetness spread gently across your tongue. No grit, no pain, no strange powders or chanting today. Just fruit, simple, uncomplicated. You let your jaw do its work, and for once, it doesn't protest. As you walk, the full arc of Egyptian dental care begins to settle into you, not as a list of facts, but as a lived rhythm, from chewed twigs to herbal rinses, from priestly salves to fig-sticky gums. It all fits into a single, patient story, the ancient human desire to soothe, to care, to endure. You pass a patch of wild persea trees and think of your first chewing stick, that bitter little branch that somehow became part of your routine. You remember Beck and his toothworms, Neferu and her party paste, the gold-wired smile of the departed scribe. You remember the babies with crocodile teeth around their necks, the elders eating soup with grace and dignity, and you think no one here took teeth for granted. Not because they were obsessed, but because they had to live with the pain when they failed, and so they learned to cope with mint, with ritual, with whatever they had. Historians still argue whether these treatments were effective or merely symbolic. But here, walking through the warm air and soft light, you realize something important. Symbolic care is still care. If it brings relief, whether through science or spell, it matters. You sit on a stone by the water and dip your hands into the Nile. It's cool. Smooth, steady. You cup some water, rinse your mouth, spit into the reeds. Just like they did, just like you've done for weeks now. There's peace in it. And then, because habits linger, you pull from your pouch one last chew stick and gently brush along your molars. A soft scrape, a little mint. A quiet thank you to the ancient ones who figured this all out before toothpaste tubes and sonic toothbrushes. A group of children run by laughing, one with a strip of linen tied around her head, probably for a toothache, and probably working. You smile. All counterfooling them. The breeze picks up again, cooling your face, ruffling your tunic. The sky darkens into velvet. The stars blink back into being, slowly, like they've been watching the whole time, and just waited for you to notice. You lie back on the earth, head cradled by your folded robe, mouth clean, jaw quiet, and mind softening like the edge of a fig. There's nothing left to do tonight. No healing needed, no rituals, no recitations, just a little stillness, a little breath, and the taste of something ancient lingering sweet on your tongue. Now, as you lie there with the last sounds of the river washing over your thoughts, let it all begin to blur. The dry rustle of reed stalks, the faint scent of mint and warm bread still lingering in your memory, the crackle of a torch in a temple corridor, where someone once whispered charms to soothe a swollen gum. Let it all slow down. The ache you carried fades, replaced by the gentle weight of story and dust. You're not chewing now. You're not even thinking. You're just here, quiet, resting alongside the Nile, where people once laughed through the sting of cedar oil and found peace in a mouthful of honey paste. Your breath, like the river, is steady, in and out, no rush. You don't need to remember every ingredient, every charm. You don't need to hold onto the rituals. You've already lived them. Now it's time to let them settle like sand on the riverbed. Let the moonlight fold around your shoulders. Let the night hum low in your ears, like a distant chorus of frogs and fig sellers and temple bells. They've all gone quiet now. Even the toothworms, if they were ever real, are sleeping, and so are you. Drift now. Float downstream in your mind, past gold thread smiles, past mint and mortar bowls, past barley fields and soft, warm soup. You've chewed enough for one life. Rest now. Sleep. You've earned it.